Welcome back or welcome to the Next Level podcast. I'm your host, John Harris. And you know how we do every week. We bring on interesting and impactful leaders from the security industry to tell us a little bit about how they got into the industry, what they're doing to make impact, and what they're passionate about both today and tomorrow. And I'm super excited to have Don Morron with us today. Now, I've had the opportunity to be on Don's podcast. He's an AI enthusiast, a security technologist. He just loves to explore the boundaries of what we're doing today with technology and what is possible in the tomorrow. And I'm happy to reciprocate in having Don on our podcast and maybe exposing my listeners to him if they haven't heard him before, and maybe crossing the wires between our two podcasts. So Don, welcome. Happy to have you. Appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely, John. Happy to be here. That was an awesome intro, man. I couldn't, I don't, I think you just made my day. So
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah. I'll cut it for you.
Yeah,
You can use them whatever you want. You just
there we
walk
go.
into a
That's
sales
it.
meeting. You can just introduce it. Put
Boom.
that in your pods. So
Yeah.
I always love to start off the origin stories, right? Like
Mhm.
nobody, like we talked about before you hit record, like no one at 17 is like,
Mhm.
I want to be in the security industry, or very rarely,
Mhm.
right? There's like a few folks who may come up with it in their family, their parents owned an integrator business, or mom or dad was a security vet, but it's typically
Mhm.
rare. We usually kind of fall into it based on circumstances that we didn't anticipate. So, Don,
Mhm.
how did you end up in this wonderful industry that we all have grown to love?
Yeah, it's a odd story, is I'm sure most people's. I mean, for me, I was working in telecom before the security industry, and I had an undergrad in criminal justice and psychology, and I was doing pre-law. I was going to paralegal school, and I couldn't get a job as a paralegal. So I went to Sprint, worked at telecom, and then post Sprint, I said, I want to like try to use my degree to get some sense of ownership, right? And stumbled upon like ADT uh, at a trade show or a job fair or whatever it was. And yeah, so I had a meeting with their business manager. They're like, "Yeah, we got this small business job. It doesn't have a salary, and we can hire you tomorrow." And I'm like, "Dude, I'm good. I got to pay bills, right?" So they said, "But maybe you want to talk to our sister company called Tyco Integrated Security. They're our commercial division, blah blah blah." So I found out who they were. I found out they were based in Boca near the beach. At the time, I was living in North Carolina. I'm like, man, how awesome would that be to go work at the beach? As a kid, I grew up, just imagining what it would be like just to go there more often than a few times every couple of years. And so, yeah, so I just started applying. And at the time, I just would go anywhere. I applied to New York, got a job actually out of Long Island, worked there for a couple years, transferred from there down to West Palm Beach, which is their closest office to Boca. Got my MBA, and at the towards the end of my MBA, I transferred out for an opportunity with Brevo, and then worked up, ranks at Brevo as an area account manager, sales manager, and business development, enterprise director of enterprise. Grew the first enterprise team. And then as a recent work for Honeywell as a global sales director for cloud. And so, yeah, it certainly, I think there was an aspect where I definitely wanted to be somehow involved in this space, but I had no idea there was a space that was like this. I'm like, cameras? There's a business around this, right? And I feel like that's what most people, when they get into, they're kind of surprised, unless they were already working in it in some shape or form in like in a parallel way. But yeah, I found out about it and been stuck since, as they call them, lifers. Like I got in and I can't get out, even if I try. Um, so that's it.
I love that. So I didn't know this about us, that I also hold a undergrad in criminal justice. I was headed to law school. That was the plan. But I didn't want to take on all the additional burden of student loans at the time, and was like, oh, you know what? I want to go. Actually, thought the idea. I still was going to pursue a JD, but federal law enforcement, because I was like, a lot of people going to federal law enforcement get a JD. That's part of the process of, like, going, moving quicker and going faster. Come from a family of lawyers too, so it was like, either one of these kind of makes sense. And And while I was waiting to figure out that decision, and maybe apply for like local law enforcement jobs as like a bridge to get me to like pay for school or things like that, I applied for a job with Securitas. Not dissimilar from you just being like, hey, ADT or Tyco, like whatever. I just need something, right? And so similar, that was 2007, and here we are all this time later. So it's funny, like how that all happens, and how it kind of serendipity takes place. And the beach is a good motivator to jump in somewhere. That's the I've been landlocked here in Minneapolis for the better part of 20 years, but we have big lakes. So there's that. We have some water. um at any rate, back to you. So along the way, you kind of this windy path through these different technology providers, learn a lot along the way. Brevo as an example, one of the first cloud access control systems, and building out that enterprise offering for them and helping them do that. So I imagine at some point, you're getting intrigued and interested by this advanced technology that's being brought to the front. Maybe first it was cloud, then it's analytics, and then ultimately we start touching on AI, and then that compels you. Recently, within the last year and a half, you start a podcast. But I assume that journey of being interested in advanced technology, and then and specifically AI, happened sometime along the way. So what got you excited or interested in learning more about artificial intelligence, machine learning, that whole sphere, and how it impacts the security industry?
I've always been a huge fan of tech, and I think if I'll something new shows up, I'll go buy it, play around with it. As a consumer, love it. The industry has certainly helped feed that feeling, right? Because we're all around it all the time, and so it's something that I do for fun. It's something that I do to get paid, and I think the biggest thing is when because AI has been around since the 50s, but it wasn't anything that hit mainstream until honestly ChatGPT. And then
Mhm.
I think the proliferation and the excess use of generative AI was a moment where probably like many people when they used it for the first time, I think I used ChatGPT 3 for the first time in 2022, and it was like, whoa, like this is crazy, right? What it can do. And I was immediately like, I gotta learn this stuff, man. Like, what is this, right? And then just went on a journey to research about it. And you know what happened? It was really starting, more so last year, where I looked into getting an education. I went to get a certificate at MIT professional education around no code, low code, ML building, machine learning building solutions using tools like RapidMiner or DataQ and all this. And and in parallel to that, just started researching about it on my free time. Whether it's blogs, whether it's white papers, whether it's posts, videos. As you fast forward to today, is become a daily part of my life, right? I get watch it, read all the TLDR reports, try to stay in the know. So, this thing changes every day. And I think there's a couple of aspects of why it's fascinating, besides the fact that I'm a technology enthusiast, and this thing changes every day. I think the other biggest part is the transformational impact that it's going to have on humans of all time, right? So to me, I mean, to not delve into that, it seems like a major miss for anyone. And I think it's not one of those things that I find is going to be similar to the Industrial Revolution or other revolutions that have hit humankind. I think this is a massive change that's going to happen. I think the LLMs and generative AI is just the start of it. There's a lot more to do, but I think for someone like me that says, "Hey, I work in tech, I love tech, and I see tech that's the coolest tech I've ever seen," then it was a natural thing for me to go into it. Now, when I started the podcast, it came at a moment of last year where I was like, you know what? Just moved to a new company, new role, been traveling a lot. I know a decent amount of people, but I've never really tried to leverage that at all in my own way by building personal brand. But I also going on to continue to pursue to learn this technology more in our security space, right? And getting different perspectives of people that see it different ways, right? Some people are pumped about it and some people are terrified of it, right? And I love seeing those different points of view because that helps me have a better perspective around it that I'm not going to get from the blogs and the white papers and the websites and the TLDR reports, right? So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Mountain Movers, John checking in with you. And I want to remind you, if you don't know, Apex Performance has coaching and training and online courses available for you made by security professionals for security professionals to help you take your leadership to the next level. So if you like the content we put in our podcast, if you're interested in learning more about what we do, click the link in the show notes or go to apexperformance.one. That's ONE, because we're number one. Learn more about what we do. Love to work with you. Now back to the show. There's two things I want to dive into there. One, the I'm a big proponent of personal
Mhm,
development, professional development, leadership
mhm,
development. You took it upon yourself to not just like educate yourself formally and informally, formal certificate from MIT, but then just, rounding out this knowledge base, you know, um, what did you feel like? What prompted you to say, this is like, I need to go learn? Because
mhm,
because others might look at that and say, cool, that's a trend. I'll read up just enough on like one sheets to be able to talk about it.
yeah,
But this wasn't like this was, you know, go back in like 2002 or 2022, 2023. This wasn't really in security products to the extent that it is today. And even you can argue like when people say that they have AI in their security tech, they're full of shit. So,
mhm,
to the extent of like what you're doing with generative AI and like
mhm,
true machine learning, there's a big, and
mhm,
we talked a little bit about this when I was on your podcast. There's a big difference between automation
mhm,
and like machine learning.
yeah,
And I John Harris's perspective of it is that like, artificial intelligence is a spectrum,
mhm,
and like automating low level human decision making is way down here on like that shit that's been
mhm,
around since the 50s, and
mhm,
then true like replication of human intelligence
mhm,
is we're not there yet.
mhm,
But we're
mhm,
fucking close, right? I mean, we're moving up that
you know,
spectrum
yeah,
rapidly. And um it- so I think like something prompted you to say, I'm not just, this isn't going to be just like a tertiary exploratory adventure for me. This is going to be an
mhm,
education mission.
mhm,
Both like what prompted you to do that,
mhm,
and what do
mhm,
you think are the benefits of, after being established in your career, no
mhm,
reason for you to say, hey, I
mhm,
want to, I need to, I already got an
mhm,
MBA, I already got, 10ish years
mhm,
in the industry.
mhm.
Why continue to improve yourself and add that extra tool to your toolkit?
You would appreciate this being in leadership, and in leadership support and growing these different leaders that I had a short stint away when I went from Brevo, and I came and when I had left, the I was offered a job to do an end user develop or sales role. And at the time, I had already sold through the channel, and I'm like, man, this is way easier, right? You take these guys out for steak dinners and just buy from you. This is a great sales job, right? I didn't even know they existed before I came to Brevo, and I didn't want it, and I had moved in that transition, which is why what happened. But what when I came back to Brevo, I just said, "Hey, I'll just do whatever you want me to do. I just know I need to be here because this is my crew and my family." And they gave me that job because they thought I was a good fit. And when I started, and I was like, "Okay, I got to call these enterprise customers," but Brevo's really like a commercial product at the time, primarily or small business. I didn't know where to start, man. And I just was like, I just started making calls, and I was failing, pissing a lot of people off. They didn't want to talk to me. Who does on a cold call, right? And I was hitting brick walls. And for a moment, I said, you know what? It's me. Like I'm the problem. And I said that to myself that I'm going to invest into sales training. And I spent I think like a grand at the time on self improvement, sales training, and just rewired myself around selling to problems and not to products. And there's a lot built into that, right? And I think that's when the enterprise sales acumen started to kick into gear, and I started using it in a practical way, and then just started to see the dominoes fall. And then as you fast forward, closing the biggest deal of all time there, and then including growing a team really that didn't exist before. And that was when I learned the first time that if you want to do something extraordinary, you have to go through pain, and then you have to also learn to get better in that process, right? So you're going to fail, but you got to learn from those failures, and then reinvent yourself constantly over time. And when I saw the AI stuff come up, I was like, hey, that's another opportunity. It's painful to learn this, man. It changes all the time. I mean, it is brutal. I mean, there's days where I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to read another report, but that's really interesting. I want to learn that. And then I'll read it, and then I'll continue to learn. And but if you do that enough, it doesn't become as bad. The beginning it was kind of brutal, and I think the education was a way to kind of force me into a curriculum that was like, okay, you have to be here at this class, you have to submit this project, you gotta you have to do I have to do these things, right? I don't have to read blogs and watch YouTube videos about all this stuff. I don't have to. But I did it so much that for such a period of time, I end up ingraining it into myself, just like I did when I changed my sales acumen, right? And I think that's the thing, right? Because I think I know how it could be, how it could seem. You got a sales guy, he wants to talk about AI. What does he know? He's not a data scientist. I mean, I would go as far to say that no one's an expert around this unless one, you either build it because you are a data scientist, um, uh, or yeah, I mean, that's probably it, right? Because you could try to learn it every single day, but it's always going to change. And unless you're practically building it, it's hard to even call yourself an expert. It's easy to do that in our industry to say I'm an SME of access control because I've been doing it for 10 years or something. Okay, fine. But the scale of learning that versus this is not even in the same ballpark because this changes so much, right? I mean, we're still talking about procs today. We're still talking about 13.56 and it's fobs and we got to use phones to get through doors. Like to me, it's a kind of a snooze. But when I think about AI, this stuff changes every single day. It's almost like the reality show that has new episodes every 30 minutes and I
Mm.
can tune in whenever I want.
Yeah.
So pretty cool.
I encourage our listeners to just press rewind for the last minutes and listen to what Don talked about like, that there's gold in that response, right? Because you talked about, a challenge, a series of failures as you took on this role and bang your head against the wall and having the personal awareness and acumen to say, like, it I got to change something, right? Insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you're going to get a different result. So, what is the variable that you can change? It yourself. And so you change that variable and you start making adjustments and you learn and you educate yourself. It's funny. I was just having a conversation with a young man who is let go from a access control company. He's in my community. He's part of the next level community. Reached out. He didn't know he was getting laid off until last 2 nights ago. So we had him call the next morning. He tells me, and and he goes, the only thing I'm frustrated about is that I didn't see this coming because I knew I wasn't doing well. And I should have asked for help. I should have done more. But I'm gonna learn from this, right? And like, so Don, to hear you say that it's just like this young man who's sitting here going, and he could have been defeated. He could have used every excuse in the book, could have pointed at them. He's like, and so I connected him with a few people that I think could help him out, but he's like, I'm going to own this. I'm going to come back better. And I'm not leaving the security industry because I love the mission of our industry. And I know I can be a part of something great. And so like, hopefully he hears this. I'm gonna send it to him after we press record because you're someone I want him to talk to as well
Sure.
because it's one of those things to show people that failure is a part of the process, right? And I tell my story very openly. When I was laid off from Linnell, I did 10 years. I was a security director at a big global company, all the
Mhm,
fancy acronyms that come with that.
mhm,
And I moved to an individual contributor sales role because I want to learn how to sell. Because I was listening, all the self-development books that resonated
mhm,
with me were from sales guys, from
mhm,
Grant Cardone and
mhm,
the guys who are doing like Ryan Serhant and like these dudes that are kind of like caricatures, but
Mhm.
like they know what they're talking about, right? And their
Mhm.
courses have helped me become a better
Mhm.
professional. And, I invest thousands and thousands of dollars in self improvement every year,
Mhm.
above and beyond my traditional education, which I have student loans I'm still paying for, but it's worth it because
Yeah.
of what it can do for you.
Mhm.
If people who will pay, go out and drop hundreds of dollars on partying and food and all that kind of stuff and won't spend
Yeah.
500 bucks on a course to make themselves better. I just don't understand it. And
Yeah.
so, I hope people hear that story that you just shared with us to show how like this shit doesn't just happen by accident. You don't have both this development and then hunger to learn um just by accident. It requires intentional focus. It requires an aggressive patience to go through that, to have the
Mhm.
output that you have now. And I think I'll call you, like, I think there's no one that I know who knows more about AI in the field of physical security than you, because of the time you've put in. Now I work with engineers
Mhm.
who build models, but they don't
Mhm.
know shit about physical security.
Mhm.
They know about building AI and ML and
Mhm.
models and
Mhm.
algorithms. But when you synthesize that with physical security, there's an interesting conversation
Mhm.
going on inside the access control community that Leo Des manages
Mhm.
for the brief and all that. And there's a Slack thread, and Don, I forget whether you're in that group or not, but there's a
Mhm.
there's a Slack thread that started at like 8 a.m. on
Yeah.
Wednesday that has been
Mhm.
going, and it's a masterclass in both why traditional access control is
Mhm.
archaic and stupid, and the challenges that we have with embracing the future technology. And it's
Right.
amazing. It's amazing. And I'll link to Lee's brief in here for those who don't have. I mean, it's worth the price of admission to get into that conversation just to read what's going on. But I digress. So you've you've taken the time, you've invested in yourself, you've invested in learning from others. So then you talked a little bit about foreshadowing kind of why you started the podcast and when you did it, but let's dive into that a little bit more. So
Mhm.
you you talk about maybe developing a personal brand, and that maybe
Mhm.
the podcast would help you develop
Mhm.
that personal brand. So, one,
Mhm.
why do you think it's important to have
Mhm.
a personal brand, and
Mhm.
why was the podcast an effective tool, or continues to be an effective tool to help you do that?
Yeah. I'm reminded by a quote from Elon Musk. It's my new favorite quote right now. As how I would start this, and then I'll give you my more direct answer. He said that I think it was in 2022. He said that life can't be about solving one miserable problem to the next. It's got to be about something that inspires you, something that wakes you up in the morning, right? And what better way to be inspired than being self-inspired, right? Where I say, like, I'm proud to wake up of who I am, of where I'm going, that I have a something to do, something to look forward to, and someone to love. And this is a life that I can create, that I am in control of doing that. And it was a moment creating the podcast where I was like I said earlier, I mean, I know a decent amount of people, and I'm not using that at all. But there's so many people like that that have the opportunity to build personal brand, and they're not doing it. And they're not doing it for whatever reason. It could be they don't have time, they have responsibilities. Some people don't like to be on camera. I understand that. As a sales guy, I feel like I could talk, but I could listen. And I said that, this is no one's talking about this directly. And I saw it as an opportunity, and I just did it. And I did it. And the podcast was not clean to start. I mean, it was just like in my regular office. Acoustics were terrible, lighting was bad. Um, I we just didn't really have a plan, much of a plan. And I just was like, do it, because what I'm gonna get like 5 views to start. I'm just gonna do it. And I think that the aspect of doing, I was actually talking to my brother about this, and he said there's entrepreneurs and then there's starters, right? You could have people that want to be something, that want to do something, but they don't start, right? The hardest thing is you just got to do, right? And there's someone that's listening to this that has a passion of what they want to do, whether it's building a podcast, building a personal brand. You just got to do it, and you will learn. And you have to realize that what I realized is I knew through the trials and tribulations of having to reinvent myself as a salesperson after being in sales for up to that point, probably I don't know, 7, 8 years, that I have to admit to myself that I am not as good as I think that I am. And I need to check myself and use this as an opportunity to relearn. That was one of the best things that could happen. So that's what happened with the podcast. So I saw it as an opportunity. I said, this is another opportunity to level up. So I used to tell my employees, if you're not leveling up in life, then you're leveling down. And if they could say if you're not getting better, you're getting worse, however you want to say it. I just feel like it's our natural response. It's our responsibility as people on this world to get better. We owe it to our creator of whatever you believe that to be, and ourselves and our family and friends to be our best selves. Right. And that might come in different ways. Some people want to exercise. It can be everything, right? In my perspective, it was around talking about something that I felt people weren't talking enough about, and also an opportunity to put myself out there in a way that I haven't before. And I'm still working on it, right? So still really new. We only dropped the 13th episode, so I think you got like twice more than twice as what I have. Um, but we continue to do our thing, and the conversations are evolving pretty quickly. A lot of them start with uncertainty to privacy, and now the next ones are like into implementation to, so it'll be interesting to see how those conversations keep up with the greater media. Um, because I'm paying attention to that probably more so even than what's happening in the industry. So,
Yeah, and I think, there's an interesting, and we'll get into this in a second, but
mhm,
the big opportunities aren't going to happen, in my opinion, inside the security industry, but what comes from the outside in and how they're applied, right?
yeah,
So like, I don't think that there's going to be this like novel idea of like some brand new AI invention born out of the industry. It's going to be,
mhm,
how can we apply
mhm,
things into the industry in a novel way, and how is that going to be disruptive? And the key is, are we industry professionals going to be the stewards of that genius, or are we
mhm,
going to be uh I guess broadsided by the
mhm,
inevitable infiltration of whatever that looks like? And
mhm,
we've been, I think, closed quarters enough over the last 20 years that we've been able to regulate the infiltration of new technology. So cloud technology, and when it was analog to IP cameras, and when we've gone to mobile, right? Like, we've had gatekeepers who have been like, only on our rules, right? You've had the big companies been able, the big security technology or integrator companies, kind of guard and gatekeep. Um, that's not going to happen with this stuff, because the technology is becoming so democratized, and you
mhm,
have new entrants into the space that don't need to ask permission, that can integrate with your systems without asking those gatekeepers for permission. And so there's a inevitability and a speed and a disruption that I think that we've never seen before. That if you're not paying attention outside the borders as you are, and if you're not learning enough about it to at least speak the language, it's going to be a rough go for the next decade.
mhm,
And before we transition to that, I just want to circle back to something that you
mhm,
said, because you and I really align on this. Um, Personal obligation to be the best version of yourself.
mhm,
And there's a gentleman that I listen to his podcast, and I've seen him speak a few times. His name's Ed Milet, and he has this concept of, again, whatever your personal belief, at the end of days, when you're standing in front of the pearly gates, wherever it is going to be, that you're going to meet a version of you that's the perfect
mhm,
version of you, and that
mhm,
his objective is to have that be a mirror image, so that I know this fully optimized, you know, just best version that
mhm,
that I strive to be. And that really resonates with me. What you said kind of reflects that to me, on this obligation that I have to my creator, my family, myself, to show up and be the best version in all facets of my life, not just professionally, but personally, financially,
mhm.
relationship wise. Like, didn't know this conversation was going to go there, but I want to highlight it because
That's cool.
when people hear what I'm posting every day on LinkedIn about, at the end of my runs when I'm trying to fire them up and talk about being the
Mhm.
best version of myself, like that's where it comes from. And when I meet someone else who seems to be on that same wavelength, I want to shine a spotlight on it and echo it, because I think people sometimes that makes people uncomfortable. So,
Mhm.
I want other people who are like you and me to hear us, to that know that they're not alone, and you don't have to be
Mhm.
uncomfortable when you're trying to be great. Because if people are uncomfortable about you trying to be your best, that's a them problem, not a you problem. And
Mhm.
two, just let them know there's other people like you out there who are trying to strive and do their best, who aren't okay with average or mediocre, and that, like, you know sounds like Don and I are two guys who are like that as well. So if you're like
Mhm.
that too, you're in good company. What Before we move
Mhm.
on, where does that
Mhm.
come from for you, Don? Like is that you've always
Mhm.
been wired that way? Were you like
Mhm.
uh you know a lot of times if people were athletes, they kind of get that drive from there. So is that always been a quality? Is it something that
Mhm.
evolved with kind of your sales role and your self evolution through there? Where does that drive come from?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a really hard worker. My mom was always a super hard worker. My dad was an immigrant. So you never really had to motivate me to get up and go work, right? You might have to do it in other ways, like eat the right foods and do other stuff. But when it came to outworking me, like it was, if I was on my game, you know, made the best person win, right? But I think the struggle that I had to today was leading up to that was while I could work, I would work like in short spurts and then give up quickly. And I
Mm,
think a lot of it was like I had the energy, but I didn't keep it. And it wasn't until, probably 7, 8 years ago, I don't even know, um, where something changed. And I was following different entrepreneurs at the time, listening to more podcasts, trying to figure out, like, trying to find my way of like why, right? Why do I get on these spurts of like I'm crushing it and I'm just like, oh, okay, I give up. And I found out my problem was is I let judgment of others get to me. I was always
mm,
worried about how it looked on the outside. And I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk a lot at the time, like Tony Robbins, a few other people. My wife came into the picture at the time. We were dating, and work was going good at the time. And yeah, I just with enough focus on that problem, I started to realize I'm like, man, like people don't notice all the imperfections that I notice, and I have to let that stuff go, And I think if I focus on the task at hand and I just get it done right, eventually I will be good enough to bet on myself.
mm,
And but you have to prove it to yourself. I told my younger brother because he's 22 and he's like looking for girlfriends, and I said, hey, you want a high value woman, you need to be a high value man first. You need to work on yourself. But I didn't know that at his age, right? I was just,
right.
just being an idiot at 22. So, but later in life, I realized I was like, you put into work and you got to prove it to yourself that you're good and that you can do it, right? And that you've been there before. Because there's a difference between, in my opinion, versus arrogance versus confidence. Confidence says that you've been there before and you know you can do it because you've done it before. And if you're saying like, "Oh, I could do this, no problem," you're not being arrogant. You just trust yourself to get it done. And so for me, it clicked some back then, but it took compounding interest of working and reminding myself that I can do it if I stick to the plan, and that people will forget the imperfections much much faster than I will, and just not letting that judgment get to me. And I think Gary would say, you know, you know, people buy things to impress people they don't even like. And so I went from a BMW to a Toyota. I'm like, why did I have a BMW? This thing's so expensive. Toyota is doesn't break, super consistent. And I'm like, I'm a Toyota guy now, right? And it's amazing how that changes things, and you start to realize like what's important, and you put the focus on the things that are important, and less of the things that aren't. And yeah, but it was a journey for me. If I could wish anything on anyone is to figure that out as soon as possible. Because there's a
Mm.
lot of people that just kind of drudge through life and just let life happen to them rather than the other way around. And not that I'm perfect. I'm still working on all of that. But I think that if people feel like they're stuck, if they feel like they don't have anywhere to go, if they don't believe in themselves, if they're not confident in themselves, they self-improvement and finding a lot of time to focus on yourself to get out of that is some of the best things that you can do in life. Because there's people that are crushing at life and they crack that code, and you can too. If I could do it, I know anyone else could do it. And it's not just about hard work, right? Because you can be the hardest worker in the room, but if you're not consistent, it doesn't matter. So
I couldn't agree
that's it.
more, man. It's one of the things I preach more than maybe anything else is about consistency. Like you talked
Mhm.
about it before, where you have these like bursts of bursts of high output with lulls in between. But if you're just consistent, and that compounds, so consistency compounds over time. And so then if you're, it takes, so I'm doing 75 hard right now, which is a mental toughness challenge for 75 straight days. You do these 6 7 tasks every day. None of them are hard. Work out twice, they have to be 3 hours apart, 45 minutes, drink a gallon of water, read 10 pages of a book, stick to a diet, um and no alcohol, or cheat days. I don't drink, so that doesn't matter. I work out twice most days, just maybe not for 45 minutes and maybe less than
Mhm.
3 hours apart. Go for a run and then maybe lift a few hours later. So I'm on day 67, 68 right now. And the number one thing is the compounding interest of consistency of the things that have just been created like that are now have automaticity. Like I just read every day. And like I was always a reader, but I listen to audiobooks or podcasts. But this is like, no, you have to read a physical book for 10 pages a day, right? And so like
Mhm.
now I'm like deeper into like I have to pay attention. I'm not like listening while I'm running or while I'm driving, like I'm sitting down, dedicating time, and I'm adding new habits, new
Mhm.
um rituals to my activities because the other stuff just happens now. So it's like that starts to create a tsunami effect of other positive activities in your life. And it just, winning compounds winning. And so when you can win by proving to yourself that you can do hard things, that's where that confidence comes from. So like now when I when I like, can I do stuff with consistency? Like one of the things that I did, I cut out all sweet. I have the biggest sweet tooth. I haven't had a donut, a cookie, a dessert, ice cream, nothing. It's 68 days.
That's tough life.
I don't think I've gone
Yeah.
this, since I was an infant. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I was like a chubby little overweight kid. Like I ate a lot of sweets as a kid, like, so there's other things, that created that lifestyle and that, maybe negative intent that I had around it. And now I'm like, well, if I can do that, like, again, I've been sober for 13 years. When I quit alcohol, I was like a full blown alcoholic. I have these inputs in my head that says if I can do that, I can do anything. Like going up and cold calling and like, getting a door slammed in my face, who cares? Like I can do that 100
Yeah.
times. And
Mhm.
then if you can do that, if you can handle that resistance, if you can get that tension out of the way, like the performance that you can get to is unbelievable. And to your point, Don, like I'm not perfect. I still have an executive coach that I work. I read every day. I'm researching like these part of this is a commitment to a growth mindset. This might not be what people expected when they listen to this at, 35 minutes in, 40 minutes in, was that like what I'm getting out of this is the amazing necessity of a growth mindset and what that can
Mhm.
unlock for you both personally and professionally. Like, I mean, that's
Mhm.
what I'm hearing. I think that's just fantastic. And so where I want to take this kind of round things out
Mhm.
is the future of artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the different aspects of what that means into the security industry. What should someone be doing
Mhm.
to prepare maybe both, like if I'm a CEO of a technology company in the industry, or I'm an individual contributor who is like, hey, this is going to affect me. Like what
Mhm.
should they be doing? How should they be educating themselves? What should they be preparing for, as this hits us so that they're not caught
Mhm.
in a position where they're caught off guard by it.
Yeah, I think the one word I would use to respond to that is reimagine. They
Mhm.
need to reimagine either themselves or their company around what they do. I just saw something the other day. It was just a highlight. I didn't watch the full video actually, but the bottom line is DocuSign is reimagining their business, right? From like the sign company, I think, into an identity access management organization or something, right? Because of everything that's going on, right? They know that it's probably super cheap to get in their space, or there's AI tech that's like right on their heels, and they have to differentiate or do something different. And I think even Honeywell did the same thing. They took their buildings technology division and turned it into automation, Honeywell automation, right? And so I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see companies reimagining who they are. I think they're going to get AI first. Yeah, and I think individuals will do the same. And I think that if I was anyone, I would be heavily researching this or talking to organizations that can research this for you based on who you are as an organization or who you are as a person, and figuring out who you are going to be in 5, 10, or 10 years, right? And if there's a ounce of risk for you, then it start the process of reimagining yourself. If there is none, which I doubt there is, if there is none, then still read up, still learn. But it's hard to say. I mean, you have once upon a time being a software engineer was a safe bet, and it's not that it's not. I mean, it is still today, but the way it's trending is it might not be. There might end up using natural language in order to code things. They had I think Devin was one of the earlier releases. This happened a couple months ago. The first AI autonomous engineer, software engineer. And they're making kind of wonky things, snake games and other stuff like that. That's not a big deal yet, but that's how it all starts. Think about the evolution of even video games. Video
Yeah.
games start off like block people, and now
Yeah.
they're virtual
Pong
reality.
with the thing going back and
Yeah.
forth. Or like think about the first
Right.
cell phone game we had, like it was
Hmm.
Snake, right? Like those were and
Yep.
like and now just recently I downloaded, a friend of mine sent me this it's a app for my iPhone where I can download open source
Hmm.
um Nintendo Game Boy games or and Nintendo DS games and the replicators on my iPhone. So I can play. I mean, it's amazing, right? It's like
Hmm.
if you think about it, and this is in like half a lifetime that
Hmm.
we've transitioned through, and just think about like I use cell phones as like one example.
Hmm.
Like I try to explain to my kids, my oldest kid's 14, on like what it was like when we didn't have phones and what it was like when I
Yeah.
first had them and I couldn't text. And I had to wait till 9 p.m. because that's when my free minutes started and like all these constraints that we had.
Yeah.
But even the ability, like you mentioned it, where the beginning it might not be fully replaced but
Hmm.
optimized, the ability to leverage AI as
Yep.
a optimization tool
Hmm.
to and you see like IBM's a great example.
Hmm.
Their commercials,
Hmm.
they are repositioning themselves as
Hmm.
a expediter, as an optimizer for engineering technology, being a
Yep.
sidekick. Let us write your code. We'll do it in four
Yep.
hours versus four
Hmm.
months. And then
Hmm.
you don't have to be like
Hmm.
this burnt out engine. Like I work with a bunch of engineers. Some of them take pride in
Hmm.
overnight 10-20 hour coding sessions, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that badge goes away when you can leverage, you can go live a regular life and leverage, machine learning to do half that code for you, and then you can focus on that next tier of thing. And just think about how fast, and that's where I think what's interesting for me, and I like your feedback on this of where the unlock of innovation is for the security industry is if we
Hmm.
embrace this tool and we bring it in,
Hmm.
and what it allows us to then start ideating and innovating on things we can't even think about yet because these low
Hmm.
level problems still exist in how we make an
Hmm.
ecosystem of security. Like imagine having machine learning algorithm that can come in and connect all disparate access control systems itself. Like that shouldn't be that hard. Like somebody out there can go build that. So all of a sudden, like that's not a problem anymore. And I can use my DocuSign single, my Okta identity to manage across all systems and they can all be
Hmm.
connected. Like I don't think we're too far from that.
I think so. AI is still limited, most of it, because it still lives on conventional thinking. It still lives on conventional computing rather. And I think once it scales to quantum, that's when it will imagine things that we could not ourselves. That's what it's going to come up with, new physics potentially that we never had, right? We work within the confines of physics today. That's how but why do we do that? Because that's the limitation of human advancement, right? But now, I mean, and they can make AGI based on conventional computing, but AGI still lives within the confines of what humans know, right? Or what it can extrapolate based on what humans know. But I think the next evolve of computing going to quantum is going to expand anything that we could have ever done. I mean, it's using like instead of transistors, using electrons to figure out every single scenario of something that could ever exist. Like it
Mm.
sounds like something from like a superhero movie, right? Or Ant-Man, which is quantum physics, right?
Right.
And so I think that's so exciting to me. I mean, something that where it's, you could find new ways to crack the code on solving illnesses that have plagued us for millennia, right? That someone we didn't know of. And I think, we've all, I mean, I don't know, maybe not, maybe your genes are really just that good, but I would say most people have had the unfortunate experience of losing loved ones to disease of some kind. Even aging is a disease, so technically everybody is. And there is a future where parts of that will be uncovered or resolved based on this technology. I mean, they tried the aspects of, I think it was human proteins with deep learning. And so you've gotten really far with what exists right now. But I think the things that they can't, when I say reimagine, try it's plenty easy to reimagine on things that you can't even imagine, right? So it's almost like I can continuously reimagine myself in this landscape for infinity because it's going to continue to evolve in ways that we can't comprehend right now. And that's the one thing I wanted to mention about the evolution of the tech, because we think about the evolution of tech and how we think about it, which is like a linear path, a progressive path, right? It goes up in stages. We don't consider the fact of an exponential growth and change, right?
Mm.
So what's happening with robotics today is, I mean, that's gotten super mainstream. But what made that possible? I mean, robotics has been around for a long time. Boston Robotics has been doing this for like 12 years or something, right? So now all of a sudden, why is it super hot in the media? Well, generative AI has allowed it the opportunity to make LLM development and AI use more accessible, and the company is cheaper, right? And they can put it on the edge, even doing small language models. And so, but the thing is, without generative AI, the thought of doing that would have felt like a linear model to say, oh, we're at least 10 years out from that.
Mm.
But as soon as something changed, the bedrock or the baseline understanding of where we're at, then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I could see that coming. I'm like, you didn't see that coming. Generative AI took a lot of people by surprise. I actually think this was based on what Google DeepMind was doing. They branched off. The talent went to OpenAI, went to Anthropic, went to several other organizations that spread out, and they lost that talent, which I think why Gemini is struggling right now, which is their large language model at Google. But
Yeah.
in any case, that's what I'm saying. I don't think any one of us can expect what exponential change is going to look like. But either way, you need to be prepared to reinvent yourself. No, I think no matter who you are in this day and age, whether you're a leader at a company or you're just starting, think about where you want to be in the next 5 years and try to educate yourself in the space.
Give you a great example of it. There's a speaker and performance coach. His name's Brendan Bouchard, and he's done some of the most pioneering research in high performing habits. He's got books and just been in the game for 20 something years. He just released an AI version of himself. He's training a AI coach. So, and why? Just why he's the one who first invested in Kajabi, which was the first, like, one of the preeminent online platforms for online learning. He's like he uses something to learn it, to invest in it, to get ahead of it in his field,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just fascinating to watch how he approaches it, and that he explores the edges of it in his industry, and then invests strategically in it, gets ahead of it, understands it, then deploys it. And if it becomes a failure, that, but for him, it's more of like an experiment, right? And so that's what
Mm-hmm.
I think is what we don't do enough of in the security industry is experiment.
Mhm.
We hold on to the way we always have done things, and that will be a losing proposition in this next 3, 5, 10
Mhm.
years, if
Mhm.
we're not willing to just see what happens when we start to bring these kind of tools and technologies into our ecosystem and see what we can do with them. Well, Don, this has been such a pleasure, such a
Yeah.
wide-ranging conversation
Yeah.
that I did not anticipate all the wonderful things that we were going to get to and where we're going to go here, but I couldn't have been more happy with how things turned out and the discussions we were able to do. I really appreciate your time. Any last words or recommendations, guidance that you have for listeners, for folks who are interested? I'll link to your podcast and to LinkedIn, so if people want to come find you, I'll point them in the right direction. But any other parting words for our listeners?
Um, like I said, think about reimagining yourself. Think about where you want to be in the next 5 years. Educate yourself around the AI space. And while it's a lot to learn, bear through the pain of that and realize it is in your best interest to do that. If you're in the industry, like John had mentioned, you're welcome to take a listen to the podcast. We have industry experts that join that have something to talk about that they're passionate about the industry. It's not enough, right? You need a lot more mediums than me. You need a lot more mediums than John. You need a lot more mediums than you could probably think of. But I think if you could take anything away, I would say for me, I would say this is the time to reimagine who you want to be, where you want to be, with AI in mind on whatever that is. And yeah, and just hit me up if you have any questions, comments, want to grab a coffee sometime. Happy to meet.
Love it, man. Appreciate your time. Thank you for being here with me. Let's go do great things.